So thank you all for taking the time to join the webinar this evening. We will start with a short presentation on our proposals for Great North Road Solar Park, including our community benefit scheme known as NG+, and our phase 1 consultation. It's worth mentioning that these slides that you see this evening are already on our website under the consultation page and our documents library. We will then show you a short video about Great North Road Solar Park and NG+, which can also be found on our website. All of our other consultation materials are available on our website to view and download. So this includes our community consultation leaflet, both of our feedback forms, all of our exhibition materials, including our visualizations and our environmental designation maps. And we also have our preliminary master plan and 9 detailed section maps of the master plan also. The presentation and video will then be followed by a question and answer session. So you should be able to see a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and you can either submit your questions during the presentation or after the presentation and video has finished. Your questions will be seen by all members of our panel, and when each question has been responded to live, we will then ensure that your question can be seen by all those that have joined this evening, just so that you can see we've answered your question as it has been worded. We will try to answer as many questions as possible before the webinar ends this evening. However, if you have any further questions or you feel as though your question was not answered in full, please do get in touch via our project information lines. This session is due to close at 7 p.m. this evening, and I will just give a quick reminder when we are nearing the closing time. So can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So on your screen now, you should be able to see the agenda for this evening's webinar. Whilst this is on your screen, I will just run through some introductions. So starting off with myself, my name is Lucy DeVols and I work at Counter Context alongside Caitlin Hughes, who is kindly sharing her screen this evening. We have been appointed by Elements Green to undertake community consultation for the project. I will now hand over to Mark Noon.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining. Yes, Mark Noon, Head of Development at Elements Green. We are obviously the developer for the Great North Road Solar Park.
Thank you, Mark. And Mark Turner.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mark Turner. I'm Chairman of Elements Green, looking after this project here in the UK and all of our other activities in other countries.
Thank you, Mark. And John.
Good evening, everyone. I'm John Heatherton, Senior Development Manager here at Elements Green.
Thank you, John. And Elena.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Elena Surieva and I'm Head of Planning at Elements Green.
Thank you, Elena. And David?
Good evening, all. David Cowling, Head of Power Systems at Elements Green.
Thank you, David. And I don't believe we have Jake on the call just yet. So, Paul?
Thanks. Hi, Paul Phillips. I work for a company called NVAMS. We're environmental consultants engaged by Elements Green on this project to oversee the environmental impact assessment.
Thank you, Paul. And Mark Evans.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Mark Evans. I'm a landscape architect. I work for a company called Absoline. We've been appointed by Elements Green to look after the master planning scheme and to undertake landscape and visual impact assessment.
Thank you, Mark. So I will now hand over to Mark Noon to outline who we are, where we are in the process, and to give you an overview of Great North Road Solar Park project. If we can go to the next slide, please.
Yes, as I say, good evening, everyone. Who we are Elements Green. As you can see from the screen, we are a renewable energy developer with 7 gigawatts of renewable energy development projects globally. That's between battery energy storage and solar PV predominantly. We, as you can see from below, are committed to powering the world's future energy needs. We have a strong team of experts in-house, and we use consultants for various planning, grid and land work as well. If we could move to the next slide, that would be wonderful. Yeah, so where we are in the project, which is we're now in consultation on this solar park. As you'll be most of you aware, the proposals are on the edge of Newark. We're looking to deliver 800 megawatts into the national grid, and that's the AC, so that's what we'd export out into national grid. The PV build will be slightly larger than that to take account of the fact that the sun shines. There's an over amount of sunshine for the amount that you put through into the grid. So on a hot summer's day, you might be looking at 800 megawatts of production, and it will produce 800 megawatts going to the grid. At times of diffuse light and at other times of day, you might want a larger amount to get your 800 megawatts out. And there's a power curve that has every degree of what you generate and what you'll send into grid for that. We began our consultation on the 16th of January. It's running till the end of the month. So that speaks slightly to what Lucy was saying at the start, in that we can we'll continue to take consultation, representations, questions, feedback from you guys all the way up till the end, till that point in this non-statutory phase of consultation, but we'll also take representation afterwards as well. And then the statutory phase of consultation will be in the autumn, into September, October, and that'll be having taken account of the views and the feedback that we've taken at non-statutory phase, which is this phase, and then further studies will carry out into the spring and summer months. This is an overall map that some of you may have been aware of so far. We have more detailed maps we will come to. We also want to give you an idea on here of what it is we're proposing. So solar PV, there's some energy storage, and then the connection point is Staithorpe substation in the south there. You can see the light blue and the dark blue. The dark blue is where we're currently proposing solar panels. The light blue is other. So that's from cables to access roads to enhancement areas. So where we're doing different things with the land. And then in terms of scale, it's 2,900 hectares. 1,600 hectares of those are PV hectares. So that'll be where we're building the PV, and then the remaining area is those light blue areas. So 1,300 hectares of that at present. So some of that will just be back to agriculture. Some of that will be enhanced farming practices. Some of that will be wetland. Some of that will be woodland, wildflower planting, and all sorts of types of enhancement. We're looking at other things as well, which we will look into through the summer and come forward with your help. But the general principles are: we're up against the A1 motorway. We then have the East Coast Main Line that you can see there. We have other designations, which Elena will come to in just a second, but the main ones being Sherwood Forest to the north west and Southall Conservation Area to the southwest. So that there's a certain area, and obviously with the Trent being a barrier to the project, there's only a certain area that is available for planning purposes to go in, and that's where we looked to go in and optimize in terms of our planning design for the project. That design will evolve. We'd like you to be involved in it and give us your feedback, see how you can change it, see how you can update it, and tell us what you think of it, and we will look into everything that's given to us and see what we can do about it. Next slide.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So yeah, just following what Mark described as our envelope for the site. our journey with the site selection started with securing grid connection at Staithorpe National Grid substation, which has since driven the individual field and land selection. So within the site selection, we've been guided by key design principles and site selection criteria. So as a general rule, we've avoided high-risk flood zones, we avoided higher-grade agricultural land, as well as any historic, ecological and landscape designations. So we focused on areas that are suitable for solar in terms of topography and also well screened with existing hedgerows and woodland. And if we go to the next slide, this will illustrate the macro scale constraints that are national. For example, you can see well that we are outside of the flood zone 3 area associated with the River Trent, but also away from higher grade agricultural land, which is the amber on this map. We're also away from the green belt. We have generally designed out of the away of the conservation areas and historic landscapes that are in the region. So if we go to the next slide, that will illustrate the regional constraints and also some of the local constraints that we've worked around as well. So every field has been selected very carefully, and within each field there has been further design work that have further refined the selection of the solar areas. Quite a lot of the areas are already screened with either existing ancient woodland or just woodland or very mature and established hedgerows, which will look to enhance and also plant more woodland in the suitable locations to enhance the screening. And next step in the design selection is illustrated in the next slide, which is going further down the details. This is our constraints map. So you can see the solar areas overlaying on top of the constraints. So the key considerations here are constraints such as residential properties. So we've applied a general principle of maintaining around at least 100 meters from residential properties, and these are illustrated by the amber dots scattered around the site. Other constraints are the overhead power lines, which we need to design around and maintain buffers as required by the operators, but also we've taken account of existing water courses, and again, where possible, we will be maintaining them and enhancing them for various species. And this has also accounted for some of the landscape or preliminary landscape work where we've looked at individual fields and made recommendations as to whether the fields are appropriate or what mitigation measures can be adopted further to alleviate any concerns. And appreciate the map and the scale is probably a bit small, but these are all available on the website as well as at the in-person events. So yeah, you're welcome to have a look at them. And yeah, we welcome any questions at the end on any of the environmental and site selection matters. Thank you.
Thanks, Elena. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the benefits of Great North Road Solar Park. It's important to note that there'll be direct benefits paid for as part of the development build costs itself. So essentially within the red line boundary, as well as a separate annual £1 million community benefit scheme called NG+, which Mark Noon will cover in a bit more detail further in the presentation. Some examples of those direct benefits as part of the scheme include permanent road improvements. So we'll need to improve the road network to allow construction, but those improvements will remain in place following that construction period. Flood alleviation measures, which I'll touch on in a bit more detail later. Significant planting and environmental enhancement, and permissive footpaths. In addition to the embedded benefits and the £1 million community fund, this scheme will generate millions of pounds of business rates as well, which is obviously particularly important at the moment, given the economic issues faced by local councils. It contributes to climate targets by avoiding 250,000 tonnes of CO2 every year. It helps reduce energy bills and provides energy security in terms of homegrown renewable energy, reducing our reliance on imported volatile energy markets. In terms of biodiversity, we've currently got around about 1,300 hectares of land available for landscape and ecological enhancement. We've created preliminary master plans showing our initial thoughts on how this may look, including around about 50,000 trees planted throughout the scheme, wildlife areas, green corridors, grasslands. All of that information are available on our boards. We've got 9 detailed boards that are online on our website, and also have been presented at public exhibitions, so you can see that level of detail. And obviously we're keen to get local feedback in terms of our initial thought process for that. In terms of local communities, we're actively seeking feedback on the design of the proposals. As part of that NG+, we've actually just employed a new member of the team who'll be joining in March, and he'll be dedicated to continuing that local engagement and trying to enhance and pull together further ideas around what NG+ might look like. Okay, next slide, please. In terms of job creation, in addition to the 400 jobs that will be created as part of the construction process, there's around about 60 permanent full-time jobs created throughout the lifetime of the project for the next 40 years. So this will be similar to the number of staff currently employed in terms of agriculture. And typically that would involve 3 annual grass cuts, annual panel cleaning, hedgerow maintenance, drainage and swales management. And there's a list of the typical jobs that will be available on the right-hand side there. Next slide then, please. So in terms of flood alleviation, we know that this is a hot topic in the area, and we've been obviously trying to discuss potential mitigation measures that we could actually embed into the scheme as part of that embedded direct benefits that I mentioned earlier. We're currently looking at various different types of mitigation available, and understanding where they are best placed throughout the scheme. So typically that would look at increasing infiltration, providing soil stability, and ultimately slow down surface water flows. It's worth noting that solar panels themselves actually have a small footprint in terms of the ground penetration. It's literally the poles that are inserted into the ground. When you look at the 2D map, it might seem that the actual coverage is much larger than that, but the actual impact on the ground is pretty minimal. We are engaging with the County Council and the Environment Agency to discuss some of these mitigation measures, but we are committed to not only just mitigating the scheme itself, but potentially going a bit further than that and actually helping alleviate some of the issues around flooding in the local area. And again, looking for feedback from local knowledge on how we can help that position. Okay. So I'll hand over to Mark to touch on the NG+.
Thanks, John. Yeah, you touched on a few elements of it there already, and a note in the question, someone's asked a really interesting, pertinent question about separate pots for separate things as well, which is a really good question there. So NG+ is our community benefit scheme. We've began consultation on this in earnest a couple of months ago, and started to seek views on what people might like to see to get their community benefit scheme going to work. The 5 key themes are in the middle of the screen there. So environment, well-being, education, food security and energy efficiency. We are consulting on this, so it might be that there is another pillar to this that people would like to see, that's something particularly important to the local area. The various schemes within the subheadings that we're starting to develop slowly and bring forward, and at the in-person community engagement events, we've already began discussing energy efficiency with individual property owners, so that's small businesses and individuals. We'll also be talking to the larger businesses as well about how we might improve with micro generation schemes, so renewable energy or insulation or car charging and that kind of thing. There are other bits and bobs going on, but a key thing that we're at pains to discuss with members of the public is the £1 million per annum fund is separate to things. There should be some ability to hive off certain aspects, certainly of things we do within the planning application, and then things that we do as part of the scheme. So what we're trying to do is ensure that as many items that have a public good are wrapped up in the build costs of the scheme. So whether that be improvements to roads and potholes and so on in access roads, their construction costs. So that will have a lasting beneficial impact on the local community. And there's questions around the permissive footpaths, walkways, bridleways and so on. Those kind of things are not an NG Plus matter. They will be public benefits that come as part of GNR Solar Farm. NG Plus will be separate, so it won't affect that funding pot. In the same way as hopefully a good amount of the flood alleviation measures should fall also within the spend of the scheme. So this is for programs. We've had representations on things such as church roofs. We've had representations on, there are a couple of ideas from some of the parish councils about microgeneration, where they might want a small solar farm, or they might want an experimental solar site to be community owned and built with NG Plus money, and that those are exactly the kind of schemes that we're taking representations on, and you can see the key themes in there. So again, education is again somewhere with a little bit of crossover, because you've got things such as the apprenticeships and the employment aspects that are benefits of the scheme, but they're within the bill costs of the project. They're not NG Plus matters. So there's a fair bit of education stuff in NG Plus, but again, we are trying our best to ensure that as many benefits come out of the build costs of the solar farm itself, and then the NG Plus thing turns it into the solar park. Yeah, next slide. Local environment, again, there's an element of what I've just been discussing, planting, the woodland, the forestry, the wetlands and so on. A lot of these aspects can be wrapped up within the build costs of the project, and then that can allow for things like we might look at community allotments, community woodland. Those kind of things could be falling within the NG Plus bracket, and GNR funds the main part of the woodland planting and so on. Education, touched upon that again. There's quite a lot of things that we're looking to do in the education sphere. We've already had some really positive engagement with the local college, which is hugely welcome. One of the things that we've had at early in the early consultation events is people worried that jobs and employment will come from somewhere else and not benefit the local area, and that is exactly what we're not wanting to do. It is actually no good to us to have employees from all and sundry coming to the solar farm. It's very expensive. It's very unreliable. Local people will stay on the solar farm. They won't be necessarily looking to move away. They have stronger links to the local area, and therefore they're more sticky as employees. So for us, it's not in our interest in any sense to have anything other than as many local people employed in the project as we can. John mentioned our latest recruit to the development team being a local coordinator for the NG Plus programme. That person's from Nottingham, with strong links to the Newark area. So again, we're from now on out, we are looking to start to skill up, and that involves people of all ages and all abilities. We're looking to be as inclusive with this as we can and get as many people employed from the local area as we possibly can. We want to be the best neighbour we can be. We want this to be, and we believe that it is going to be, a wonderful scheme for the local area. But we're consulting on all these matters. We want your feedback on all of these elements. And again, well-being, I see there are some questions coming through as well on elements of in terms of whether things should be bridle ways or cyclists and so on. So we can discuss that in the Q&A. But yeah, we're looking to create social goods in every respect on the project. So again, your ideas on that are welcome, and we invite them. That's what consultation is for. And if you give us your ideas, we can act upon them. We're trying to come up with as many ideas as we can as well, but it's useful to hear what the public think. Yeah, that's good for me.
Go to the next slide. Perfect. Thank you, Mark. So you should now be able to see our indicative development process timeline on your screen. So Great North Road Solar Park is classified as a nationally significant infrastructure project because it would generate more than 50 megawatts of electricity. So we are therefore required to apply for a development consent order, or DCO for short, which we will submit to the Planning Inspectorate, also known as PINS, rather than the local planning authority. So PINS, acting on behalf of the Secretary of State for the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, they will examine our proposals and will then make a recommendation to the Secretary of State on whether to grant consent. Consent will then be determined by the Secretary of State, which is anticipated to be in between 2025 and 2026, as you can see on the screen. As you can see, there are two circles highlighted in red, which shows what we have already done and where we are now. So in November of 2023, the Environmental Impact Assessment Scoping Report was submitted to PINS. The Scoping Report sets out our approach to assessing and reporting on the potential environmental effects of the project. PINS were then asked to provide feedback in the form of a scoping opinion, and the scoping opinion informs the environmental impact assessment that will then be carried out on the proposals, and this will be presented at our second phase of consultation in our preliminary environmental information report. As also shown on the timeline, we are now undertaking our first phase of community consultation, which, as Mark mentioned earlier, it began on Tuesday the 16th of January, and it will run for 6 weeks until Tuesday the 27th of February. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this first phase of community consultation is non-statutory. So while it's not formally required, it's intended to give the local communities and key stakeholders an opportunity to influence the proposed development from a very early stage by sharing your views and your local knowledge. We will acknowledge all of the feedback that we've received during consultation and take all of your comments into consideration to help shape a strong set of proposals that will take into account the concerns of local communities. It's also worth mentioning that this is not the only time that you'll be able to have your say, and we did receive a few questions about this at our events last week. So we will be carrying out a second phase of consultation in autumn of this year, and that will give you the opportunity to comment on our updated proposals and also see how the project has evolved since the first stage of consultation. We can go to the next slide, please. So this slide details the upcoming consultation events that we have this week. So last week we held events in Eakring, Laxton and Newark. So this week we have an event in Carlton-on-Trent, Maplebeck, and our final in-person event for this round of consultation alone is in Kelham. So we really hope to see you at one of our upcoming events if you haven't already attended. And we can now go to the next slide. So we really want to hear your feedback on our proposals, and there are many ways that you can have your say. You can either submit you can complete our online feedback form via our website. So the link for that can be found on our consultation page on our website. Or you can return a handwritten feedback form or a letter to our free post address, which is Free Post GNR Solar, and you do not require a stamp to send this back to us. We also have an NG Plus feedback form on our community benefits scheme, which can be found via the NG Plus website, which you can see on screen. It's worth noting that we will have printed materials at our consultation events. So we'll have printed copies of our Great North Road feedback form, our NG Plus feedback form at our event. And we will also have envelopes, which will have our free post address written on there for you to take away with you. However, if you would rather submit your feedback in free form via email, you can do so by emailing info@gnrsolarpark.co.uk. And as it says on the screen just there, that all information about Great North Road and NG Plus can be found on their respective websites, which are shown on the screen. And the deadline to submit feedback is either on or before Tuesday, the 27th of February. However, all of our comms lines will remain open throughout consultation and beyond that. So please do feel free to contact us with any questions that you have via email or phone line. And we go to the next slide, please. So thank you all so much for listening to our presentation and attending this evening. So we will now show you a short video which may answer some of the questions that you've been submitting through the Q&A, or it may spark some new ones as well.
NG Plus is a community support scheme linked to the proposed Great North Road Solar Park in Newark. Our mission is to deliver a brighter future through our annual £1 million fund. With this fund, NG Plus will support and deliver projects to benefit the local community with a focus on the environment, education, food security, well-being and energy efficiency. NG Plus is committed to enhancing biodiversity by developing woodlands, meadows, wetlands and hedgerows, establishing wildlife corridors, supporting beekeeping initiatives and improving soil quality in collaboration with local farmers like me. We're also working alongside Solar Energy UK and regional developers to create jobs within the community. We will be collaborating with local universities through research funding, trial sites and student bursary schemes, as well as reskilling the local workforce with traineeships and apprenticeships. New picnic and play areas, additional footpaths and mountain bike trails will enhance the local amenities and create healthier spaces for you to enjoy. We're passionate about tackling food poverty and reducing food waste by supporting targeted food distribution, raising awareness of nutrition and helping people to develop
I think we're just having some technical issues with the video. So
I was going to
Lucy,
say,
Caitlin, if you could just put it on so that it would share screen and maybe start from the beginning.
yeah, apologies all. I think we're having some screen sharing difficulties.
I wonder, could we perhaps answer some questions while we're awaiting the video to rejoin, Lucy, as chair, do you think?
NG Plus is a community support scheme linked to the proposed Great North Road Solar Park in Newark. Our mission is to deliver a brighter future through our annual £1 million fund. With this fund, NG Plus will support and deliver projects to benefit the local community with a focus on the environment, education, food security, well-being and energy efficiency. NG Plus is committed to enhancing biodiversity by developing woodlands, meadows, wetlands and hedgerows, establishing wildlife corridors, supporting beekeeping initiatives and improving soil quality in collaboration with local farmers like me. We're also working alongside Solar Energy UK and regional developers to create jobs within the community. We will be collaborating with local universities through research funding, trial sites and student bursary schemes, as well as reskilling the local workforce with traineeships and apprenticeships. New picnic and play areas, additional footpaths and mountain bike trails will enhance the local amenities and create healthier spaces for you to enjoy. We're passionate about tackling food poverty and reducing food waste by supporting targeted food distribution, raising awareness of nutrition and helping people to develop their culinary skills. By providing grants for home improvements such as insulation, directly funding energy efficiency projects and supporting innovation through green startup funding, we can ensure that powering homes and businesses doesn't have to cost the earth. Now it's over to you. We want to hear about any initiatives you have that we can support or help you deliver. Contact community@ngplus.uk and let's make a difference.
In my farming career, we've certainly seen a change in the climate. It seems since the turn of the millennia, we're getting more extreme weather. We just look back to the summer of 22. We had recorded 40 degrees centigrade in the middle of July here. I've never seen that here before. It felt like you were in Australia. It was that hot, and the crops essentially just died in the fields. They just couldn't stand that temperature either. We've got to combat the change in our climate. We're changing our farming practices, but I guess we've got to change the way we produce our electricity so that we emit less carbon into the atmosphere. And that's what you'll do once the solar project is up and running. You can plant various grasses. You can put wildflowers in there as well. That's going to benefit the pollinators. And I guess those are the sort of things that we have sort of lost in the sort of decades of intensive sort of farming. Environmental benefits, creating new habitats, creating new renewable energy, which has got to be good for the nation, isn't it? It's a low carbon way of producing electricity.
Hello, I'm David Chase. I'm a second generation farmer living at Ladywood Farm, Weston. So I started with 1 hive. I went up to 15 the first year, which is quite a major jump, and now I'm about 60 hives. I supply a variety of shops, and I have about 5 different types of honey. Right, I'm hoping that the solar farm will benefit the bees because of the wildlife margins around the outside. That we'll be able to get some wildflower mixtures put down and be able to maintain them for the benefit of all the local wildlife, not just the honeybees. I was looking around for ways to carry on, basically. My name is Peter Littlewood. I've been farming here since 1961, which is when I left school, and we bought this farm because of that. Recently, we've decided that maybe solar panels could be a very good way to go. The fact that the ground can be utilised underneath the solar panels, we have to admit the income from them will help a lot, because agriculture at the moment is struggling, and to survive as a family farm, we could do with a steady income coming from solar panels.
Thank you all for watching, and apologies again for the technical difficulties we just experienced there. It's worth noting that the video is available to view on our website, so it's available on the consultation page and in the documents library, and it will also be shown at our community consultation events as well, so if you do need to go and rewatch it. So we will now begin the question and answer session. So I will be reading out each of the questions that have come through in chronological order for members of our panel to answer. So the first question we have here says, will you have a separate fund to pay for upgrading of local roads and fixing potholes? There is much concern that agricultural land currently used for food production will be covered by solar panels for the GNR solar park. Do you have stats on what food is currently grown on the land you'll be using? Also, are all the local farmers in favour of the solar park proposals? So I know there's a few questions in there, but Mark Noon, would you like to take that question?
Yeah, thanks, Lucy. Yeah, really good questions there. Yes, we, in terms of a separate fund to pay for the upgrading of local roads and fixing potholes, this is part of the construction costs of the project. I understand from the list there is a separate question on that, and I've got a separate, there's someone separate designated to answer that, so we can come to that later. But yes, essentially, the concern that potholes and local roads will be upgraded, there'll be passing places, and potholes fixed in the areas we're taking access, of which there are a reasonable amount of access places we're taking. Those areas will be indeed upgraded as part of the build cost of the project. In terms of agricultural land, I hope that the infographic was useful in the video that's just been shown. That's why I've got them done. You can see that the meagre amount of land that will actually be taken to hit the overall UK government target, and the agricultural land usage, i.e. what is currently grown, is a mix. So there's a lot of arable land in there. There is some grazing land. And in terms of stats on that, no, we haven't got a root and branch stat on what is grown in each area, but we do have a good idea of what crops are in various areas across the scheme, because we're obviously working on the scheme and studying it and so on. But I think we talk a lot about the issues around food waste being a much bigger issue necessarily than the taking up of agricultural land. In the overall footprint, even to hit the government target, is low. Another thing to note is that the land is not taken up permanently. It's returned to agricultural use after 40 years. The next point on this is that the soil quality is improved by the rest that the land will get, and that feeds into. And I think there's been other questions on this in the round as well, in terms of river quality and water quality as well, because obviously we're not then intensively farming it. It will be down to grass. That also has a positive effect on flooding, because there's an absorption factor as well. So there's a lot going on here in this particular locality, and there's a lot of benefits of what we're planning to do with the land. A further benefit I should point out is, and it speaks to another point, which was a small question that I can answer while we do this, which was, someone asked if John Miller was a local farmer. He is a farmer on the scheme, and he engages in the practice he was talking about in terms of carbon sequestration and light tilling and enhanced agricultural practice. We're going to be doing a lot of that on the scheme as well, with him as a key consultant on it. So it's about farming better. It's about better use of the land. It's about better and more appropriate use of the land in this area as well, because flooding is a key aspect here. So it's about, if there was an issue where the solar industry were taking up too much land generally, then it would be a different question. But because that's absolutely not borne out in fact, then the best thing to do, the most appropriate thing to do, is improve the problems that are local to the area. And one of those is clearly flooding. One of those can be helped with natural solutions. So I appreciate that's about 16 answers to the one question, but I think a lot of this is integrated. I think there's an integrated picture here, and it's useful to sort of look at that. So if people are, I know we've got people that are against the scheme, and some of them are against it for 5 or 6 reasons. And sometimes you look at it and think, well, if you're against it for that reason, then this is a positive about it. So some things it's good to be against it for, but you can't be against it for everything. So I hope that helps. And local farmers in favour of the solar park proposals, yes. The local farmers are in favour of the proposals. They're engaged in the process, and there are landowners. There will be certain farmers, I'm sure, are not pro. There's a difference in opinion across the piece. We've seen quite a lot of positive engagement, so we've had a really mixed picture. Some people fervently against it, some people really with us and love the scheme, and then every shade in between.
Thank you, Mark. So the next question we have here says, what levels of animal stock will be used for grazing around the solar panels, and have the change in nitrogen runoff levels been considered, possibly as part of the flooding and water table calculations? Believe Mark Turner, you'd like to answer this question.
Hi there, and thank you everybody for taking the time to listen to us this evening. So I guess stock levels typically, or rather to take a step back, we don't anticipate that all of the time, all of the land that has panels on it will be used for sheep grazing. It's 1,600 hectares, that would be an awful lot of sheep grazing. And so some of the time, some of the land will be used for sheep grazing. When it is grazed, I mean, typical stock densities for sheep are about 6 per acre. There tends to be a different approach when you're grazing solar farms, that rather than just leaving the sheep to wander all over the solar farm where they can be a little bit harder to find than normal, you tend to zone off areas of the solar farm, graze those down, and then move them on to the next one. So using electric fences within the solar farm to keep the sheep contained. So the farmers have a lower density, or rather a lower stock level than the entire field would allow, but they keep them contained within an area and move them from area to area. So the different approaches, many solar farms are grazed around the UK. So there are a number of different practices, and I believe actually the solar farm that is up just to the east of Egmonton is grazed at the moment. So that's one in your own area that is grazed. In terms of nitrogen runoff, nitrogen runoff is a result of fertilizers that are put onto the land. Whilst the panels are there will be no fertilizer put onto the ground. If the sheep are grazed, it's a mix of sheep grazing or grass cutting. If the grass is cut, the grass is left to mulch on the site and just absorb back into the ground. That helps build up a good mat of grass, which helps capture water when it does rain, as we know it does very heavily. So there are no fertilizers, so nitrogen runoff is reduced by having solar farms in place rather than commercially farmed land. And I think in terms of sort of flooding studies, there's a lot of detailed flooding study that needs to be done. We're very conscious of the issues in the area. We believe that inherently solar farms can actually improve that situation for some of the reasons I mentioned, and we're looking for the opportunity to take additional measures that we can at the time that will actually make the situation better than it is today. Okay, I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Mark. So the next question that we have here is, what proportion of the land have you already at any stage of lease/purchase agreement in progress, and what worst case proportion do you currently consider might have to be by compulsory purchase? I believe Mark Noon, you'd like to take that question.
Yeah, I mean, the first part of that question is commercially sensitive. However, I can say that the second part of the question is, do we consider it might have to be compulsory purchase? Not of the solar land, no. So there's no question of taking people's land away who don't want it to be taken away. That's not what's going on here. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Mark. The next question or statement also says the NPPF paragraph 104 states planning policies and decisions should protect and enhance public rights of way and access, including taking opportunities to provide better facilities for users, for example, by adding links to existing rights of way networks. How would the developer achieve this? There are 13 bridleways and byways directly impacted by the proposals. Equestrians only have access to 22% nationally of public rights of way, so it is essential to protect, extend and improve off-road access for vulnerable road users. I believe, Elena, you would like to take that question.
Yes, thank you. So protecting and enhancing footpaths has been firmly within our design philosophy. we are aware of the wide public rights of way network across the site. So we've given it quite a bit of thought, and we are further consulting on how to improve the network and increase the connectivity between the bridleways, footpaths, and the various publicly available routes in the vicinity of the site. So one of the ideas that we've put forward is to create a circular route looping around the entire site. This creates new permissive routes, which will be either in the form of footpaths or bridleways or routes for various users. So we are actively consulting on what these footpaths and bridleways can look like, what would be their most frequent use, and depending on the feedback we get, we will refine those proposals. We've already had some feedback from equestrian people who are horse riders, and we seek feedback on matters such as what surfacing is suitable for horse riders or indeed other users. So we very much welcome feedback on how this can be improved. And the circular route and the proposed footpath network is available in the preliminary master plan, so you can have a better idea as well on the plan as to what we are currently proposing.
Thank you, Elena. The next question we have here says, why permissive footpaths? This would exclude cyclists, wheelers and equestrians. I believe Mark Noon, you'd like to take that question.
Yeah, the idea is not to create exclusion here. The idea is to increase access to the countryside. And yeah, we would very firmly wanting to look at the ideas that the public have. So it's a really good question. How can you increase access for cyclists and equestrians? Please give us that feedback. Yeah, we got it here in I think that this is more feedback than a question, isn't it, for the questioner? Please do give us that officially. So rather than just a question said, I'd like to see more equestrian access. I think that's what you're getting at, and we hear you and we'll assume that. Please tell us if you're not asking for that reason, but we think you are. We'll take that into consideration with the feedback and look into what we can do to improve that access.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Mark. So the next question we have here is, can you explain how the scheme will raise the millions of pounds in business rates? I believe Mark Turner would like to answer that question.
Yeah, certainly. This project is a commercial business, and as an aside, it receives absolutely no subsidy or support from the government in any way, shape or form. As a commercial business, it is obliged to pay business rates. There's a standard formula that is agreed by the Rates Office and Solar Energy UK for the rateable value of a solar farm, and our estimate is somewhere in the order of £1.5 million a year of business rates will be paid by the project under that formula and following the UBR. So this is part of just a standard calculation for a commercial business paying business rates.
Thank you, Mark. The next question asks, where will the £1 million a year come from? Will it be from profits, so essentially the bill payers? How will this £1 million per year be? Oh, I believe that question has been answered. Let me just go back. How will this £1 million per year be guaranteed each year for the lifetime of the project?
So the £1 million a year does indeed come from the income that the site will earn. So it is, if you like, a cost to the project that it chooses to make this contribution into the NG Plus fund. One of the things that is very important is you raise absolutely the critical question of trust and ensuring that through the life of the project that money is paid. It's important that we set up the structure of how that money is given over to a separate trust. So we will create a separate trust to operate and run NG Plus. It will have a terms of reference. It will have a board of trustees whose job it is to ensure that it follows those terms of reference. And we need to set it up in such a way that it's not possible for the company that operates the solar farm to unilaterally cease to make the donations that have been agreed. It will then be the job of the separate organisation, the NG Plus Trust, to distribute that money in line with its terms of reference, which will be all about the 5 pillars that Mark spoke about. Clearly, we can't know today what in 30 years' time is a sensible project for energy efficiency, education, well-being, food security. So the terms of reference have to be broad enough to allow the Board of Trustees to distribute that money. And one of their key objectives will be to distribute that money and not to hold it back. So to make sure that it goes into those things. So we have to have something that is both trustable and secure, but also robust for the next 40 years.
Could I just add on to the end of that? One of the companies that we are looking at to administer the fund is a local charity. So it's local to the area. We're in conversations with them at the moment. They haven't been appointed yet, but we are in conversations with a local charity that administer funds such as this. So it's another thing we're trying to bring that employment to even better, a sociable fund that has employment within it.
Thank you both. So this next question just builds upon what you've both said already. So it asks, when will this NG Plus fund become available? Some of our village halls are in urgent need to improve energy efficiency. Will we have to wait until 2027? I believe Mark Turner, you'd like to answer that one.
I guess the short answer is for most of it, yes, you will, because it's paid out of the income that the business makes, and right now the business isn't making any income. However, as Mark Noon also said just a moment ago, we are hiring somebody who is starting this program of work now. So we're starting to put in place the foundations for doing this, and we are looking for opportunities where we can start NG Plus work today, because some of the things that we do don't require the kind of money of £1 million a year, but we believe we can get on with doing some very good things and joining up some things that are associated with the project. And that's why we've hired somebody well ahead of 2027 to start doing this. Now, I'm going to be honest, that's not going to stretch to improving the energy efficiency of a village hall. In terms of doing the work, it might stretch to paying for energy efficiency studies and surveys, so as then it's clear what work needs to be done. And we are also focusing on some other areas where a lot of effort rather than money can bring a lot of benefit. So those are things like education and food security, where it's more about, as I say, more about effort than spend, and you can get a lot of benefit. And as Mark says, engaging with local communities and colleges is a key thing, where we have people that can already engage and can give their time and our time to contribute towards that. But yeah, the £1 million starts when the project is up and running, not, by the way, when the project is in profit, but when it is up and running. So that again is a significant advance, because you can imagine the capital expenditure of building a project like this. It will take a long time before it's actually making a profit.
Thank you, Mark. So the next question here asks, as well as solar panel lines, what other subsurface works will there be within each plot? For instance, inter-panel solar and communication lines. And what else? I believe Mark Turner would like to take that question.
Hi. Yeah, so the panels themselves, as Mark mentioned, are the framing is piled into the ground. The cables that connect each of the individual panels together are strung together along the framing, lifted up out of the way to make sure that sheep don't catch themselves on them. So the plant is built sheep-proof. As those cables are brought together, we then have buried cables that are typically 60, or depending on the size, 90 centimetres, buried 60 or 90 centimetres underground. Communication cables run in the same trenches. So we dig a trench, we bury the cable, and we fill the trench back in again, and you won't be able to see where it is. There are, the size of the cables gradually increase, as you can imagine, as they carry more current as they head towards the substation. So really, it's only buried cables that we have buried 2 to 3 foot below the ground for those working in old money. The other impact that we have on the ground, we have the smaller substations that convert the DC electricity from the panels into the AC electricity that the grid consumes. And these are pieces of equipment called inverters. Those inverters typically sit in a 20-foot container, and there is one of those for every couple of megawatts. They will stand on a concrete base. So you have a small concrete base. If you go on Google Earth and have a look at the Egmonton or the Eakring solar farm, you'll see there these small containers that are dotted across the site. And those have to stand on concrete plinths because they're fairly heavy, and if they didn't, they'd sink in the ground. But all of that has to be removed at the end of the project life and decommissioned. So very low on concrete, buried cables, which again have to be taken up at the end of the project life. Again, I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Mark. I'm coming back to you again for this next question. So the next question asks, where do the build costs come from? Is this Elements Green funds?
No, in short. A project of this scale all in is going to cost around about £1 billion to build, including the PV and the battery. In order to build a project of that kind, a business like ours who are a developer, we go to other funders who will help provide us that construction finance. And this is very normal in the construction business. There are different kinds of people that we work with to do that. We work with financial institutions at the moment like Barclays, Investec, Santander, UBS. There are other large infrastructure funds, so funds that build roads, railways, power stations, who invest in projects of this kind. These are people like Brookfield, BlackRock, very large infrastructure funds who raise money typically from pension funds, who provide them with the funding for them to then invest into specific infrastructure projects, roads, railways, power stations, etc. And then the other kind of investors that get involved in projects like this are so we tend to call those the financials. The others we call the strategics. The strategic investors are people who are already active in the energy business. And these can be people, and I'm not saying these because these are names of people that we are specifically talking to, but to give an illustration, you have energy companies like RWE, NL, Centrica, and then you have other energy and oil majors, people like BP, Shell, and others who are, their business is energy, and therefore they invest in energy infrastructure and energy assets. So you have the big financials, you have the big energy majors who help us provide the finance to build a project of this kind.
Thank you, Mark. The next question we have here asks, have you had any contact with the various other solar farm proposals in the Greater Newark region? It seems likely that other projects will piggyback on your backbone infrastructure and be merged or purchased along with yourself by a larger company, for example, SSE or Octopus, etc. I believe Mark Turner coming back to you for that one.
Hi. Thank you again, Simon. Another good question. No, it's absolutely not possible for them to utilise this infrastructure. If we come back to the reason why this project is being built here, it's because we have secured 800 megawatts of capacity and a contract with National Grid to inject 800 megawatts into the grid. The solar farm that we're building will produce that 800 megawatts, so that capacity will be fully utilised. So there is no infrastructure and there is no connection agreement that anybody else would be able to exploit, because this project will have maximised it. That, if you like, I guess that's one part of the answer. The other is we are putting in a planning application, this DCO application that goes to the Secretary of State. That application cannot be varied, added to. If somebody wanted to do that, and they can't because there's no more grid connection, as I just explained, they would have to go through this whole 4-year process again. And the decision would have to be made again by the elected representative, the Secretary of State. So It is not actually technically possible, but even if it was, they would have to go through an entire planning process in order to attempt to do that. But they can't connect because the capacity is fully utilised.
Thank you, Mark. The next question here asks, how close are the solar panels to properties and will they rotate to follow the sun? I believe John will answer the question.
Susie, yeah, so one of the key considerations was obviously the proximity to properties. At the moment, there are around about 26 properties within 50 metres of our red line boundary, which includes both panels and enhancement areas. And this obviously has the potential to reduce further as we refine our designs. In terms of proximity to solar panels themselves, properties, we've included a 100-metre buffer at this stage, which will be reviewed further as we go through further environmental assessment work such as noise and landscape. At this stage, we're considering both fixed panels which don't move and also trackers which do rotate to follow the sun, but it's likely that we're going to go with fixed, but we'll confirm that at the next consultation once we've done some further study work.
I'd also add, just in terms of the following the sun on a tracker, what a tracker is, it's called a single axis tracker. It just rocks. So it moves from east to west. Some of you may have, as I have been in the south of Spain, where you see these enormous big sails that follow the sun like a daisy. Then this is absolutely nothing like that. You'll also see that usually when you see those things, at least 30% of them are pointing in the wrong direction. So yeah, at most, it's a panel that is just rocking from side to side, but I think it's very unlikely that we will do that.
Yeah, just further to that rocking as well, it only does it at the speed of the sun, so you don't actually see it moving. So it's very clever stuff, obviously, unless the sun speeds up, it's miraculously, we don't think that's going to happen. You don't actually see them turn, they just go slowly.
Thank you all. It's just a flag that we are almost at the 15-minute mark, so we have about 9 questions left that I can see. So I'll move on to the next question, which is, what is the capacity of the substations around the solar park? How many are there and how are they connected to each other? David, have you done for that question?
Thanks, Lucy, and thank you for the question. So the total solar park in terms of capacity is it's just over 1 gigawatt, and there will be 4 sort of main substations around the ring to kind of essentially pull all that power together into a centralized location to then feed it down to the grid connection that Mark was referring to earlier. So roughly around 250 megawatts each, which will then sort of transform that energy up to 132,000 volts, all underground, so absolutely no above ground electricity transmission infrastructure, in addition to what's already there. And as I said, all marshalling that together into one substation to then make use of the capacity that is available at Staythorpe substation.
Thank you, David.
If I could just add something to that as well, in terms of the 4 substations, in terms of visual impact, the size of the 132,000 volts, as David said, and they take up the footprint of around an acre. Now that acre includes an acre of land, that includes the planting that will go around them. So they're about 0.7 of an acre, and we will be putting substantial planting around them. So they're not vast 20, 30 acre substations such as you'd see down at Staythorpe, for example. So that's just to give an idea of scale for people thinking about the visual impact of it.
Absolutely.
Thank you both. The next question here, which also includes a quote, says, footpaths and mountain bike trails unfortunately excludes other vulnerable road users. Mark, would you like to comment on that?
Yes. Again, I think it speaks to a question that a question that was asked earlier, and yes, indeed, we will take this feedback on board and look at how we can look at accessible access, if that's the right use of the words, into the scheme. we don't want to exclude anybody. That's not our objective with this scheme. It has a general social good attached to it. We want to, we're working and reaching out to vulnerable groups, and we are in consultation with them with a lot of NG Plus matters, and we really do want to hear that feedback and hear that that's something that's wanted, and access to the countryside is something that people want to look at, and we want to engage in conversations around that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. The next question here says, Newark and Sherwood District Council are advertising for an extra town planner. Some people think that our council cannot afford to pay for another staff member to help them cope with the extra load of planning applications, including solar farms. How much are all your planning applications, inspections, etc., going to cost us at council taxpayers? I believe Mark Turney, you'd like to answer that question.
I think I can answer that, Mark.
Yes, I'm going to leave it to somebody who really knows what they're talking about.
Yeah, I can pick that one up, Lucy. Thanks for the question. So we totally appreciate resource issues within councils. So what we've done is we've agreed in principle to what is called a planning performance agreement, which is typically called a PPA. And essentially that's a legal document committing us to paying for the council's cost to appropriately resource their work in relation to our scheme. So we're currently sort of talking with the council on the amount of resource required, the cost of that resource, but it essentially covers all of the costs for the planners in-house, the technical experts that they've got in-house, and any other external consultants they require as part of this process. We're still in the process of finalising that amount, so I can't give you an exact figure at this stage, but rest assured we're obviously wanting to cover the cost the council is going to incur in working with us on the scheme. And just to confirm, this is totally separate to the business rate point that Mark mentioned in terms of 1.5 million business rates. Hopefully that answers that question.
Thank you, John. The next question asks, I see there is a battery site planned near Aram. What is the capacity of the battery storage site, and will it be connected to the solar park, or will it import from and export to the national grid? Mark Noon, you'd like to take that question.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think just firstly, just to ensure that there's no confusion around projects, because there is indeed a battery site planned near Aram. It is planned by SSE, so a rival developer to us. Their capacity is 437 megawatts, I believe, on that site. It won't be connected to our solar park because it isn't ours. It will import and export from the national grid. So that's the Aram site. There is also a Staythorpe project, which is a 360 megawatt project, which we took into the local council last year, or a separate business within Elements Green took into the local council last year. That is subject to an appeal, and it's the same thing. It will import and export from the national grid. It won't be connected to the solar park. Its design is to go in and out of the national grid and move power.
Thank you, Mark. The next question says, my understanding is that modern solar panels do not require much maintenance, so the number of long-term technical jobs would appear to be limited. I would imagine it takes more hours to check on sheep than it does on the panels. With Mark Turney, you'd like to respond to that?
Certainly. So in terms of maintaining the solar panels, right, panels and the associated equipment don't require much maintenance. They do require quite a lot of inspection, separate from, so not actual work, but checking on them. And that's done in a number of different ways. We use drones with thermal cameras once a year to inspect the panels. We inspect the connections with thermal cameras to make sure that the connections are good and we're not losing any energy through resistance. So the 60 jobs that we talked about are jobs in addition to the jobs that are necessary for managing the land, and the jobs that are required for managing the land, which is cutting the grass, looking after sheep, cutting the hedges, clearing the ditches, doing all of the other groundworks and cleaning the panels once a year. All of those jobs broadly, so those land-based jobs, if you like, broadly aligned to the land-based jobs that are currently there looking after the farms in their agricultural use. So the technical jobs are additional. In terms of sort of how many hours it takes to check on sheep, then yes, going and checking on the sheep, but any sheep, that's additional work over and above. So yeah, technical jobs, 60 odd technical jobs, in addition to the levels of employment that are currently in place to manage the land, because there are at least 4 visits to every piece of field, 3 grass cuts and a panel clean, ditches and hedges as normal. So hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you, Mark. The next question says, what type of agricultural activity would be compatible with the solar park? I have seen sheep graze around panels, but not a crop fit for human consumption. Big Mark Turner, would you like to answer that question?
Certainly, as we talked about, sheep are used. We will not 100% of the time be grazing every single piece of this land, but sheep are used. People have tried lots of different things in terms of co-use with other crops, and it is possible because the panels are quite reasonably high above the ground. There is light, there is grass, and again, if you go and look, we're planning to organise an open day at one of the local solar farms, so people can come and visit and have a look and see what an operational solar farm looks like, what the ground looks like, and if you're able to join us on one of those, you'll see that grass grows all the way underneath the panels, so there's no dead areas because they're too shaded or anything. In countries like Italy, they've attempted to do things that they call agrivoltaics, where they grow other crops underneath the panels. The downside of doing that is that in order to get enough room for the crops, and importantly enough room for the harvesting equipment to get underneath, the panels end up being 5 or 6 meters up in the air, and clearly that introduces a very different problem, which is the very top of these panels will be 3 meters high from the plans that we're working on. If those panels are now 5 or 6 meters up in the air, the visual impact of doing that is substantial. So it's not our chosen approach to do that at all. We won't be doing that. So that's the problem. You can grow stuff underneath panels, but you can't harvest it.
Thank you, Mark. The next question will build upon something that Mark Noon mentioned earlier about the operational lifespan of the project being 40 years. So the question asks, compared to other current solar panel schemes in the UK, how big will this one be in comparison? What is the lifetime of this project, and will it be there forever? Mark Noon, I think you'd like to take that question.
So it's a really good question, Marie. Yes, it is the largest project in the UK. It's 10 to 15% larger than the next biggest proposals. Lifetime of the project, Lucy's just touched upon, as we said earlier on, it's a 40-year term. As for will it be there forever? It would require certain hurdles to be met for it to continue beyond the 40 years. First one of them being planning. So a planning extension would be required for that to happen. Then you'd need a commercial extension. You'd need the land owners to be on board with doing that as it presently stands. In terms of planning, we will be looking to decommission the site as per an order of government at the end of the 40 years. That's also what is required by the owners of the land, because we will not own this land, we will be leasing it, and our leases come to an end at that point. So that may happen, and who knows where we'll be in 40 years time, who knows what the technology will look like, and so on. One thing I can say is, with the substantial levels of planting and the substantial work we're doing around the solar park, you would hope that there's very little in terms of visual impact to this. There'll be a good positive gain for it. So if it is to stay there, it would be something that would be 40 years into its operation. It will have substantial benefits having been realised by that point, and that might be something that's embraced at that point as well.
Thank you, Mark. The next question asks, will the underground cables lose some of the power generated along their connections? Leave Mark Turner for that one.
I'll let David answer this one, I think.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for the question. So the short answer is yes. All cables and all conductors, whether it's transmission voltages or the cables that you charge your mobile phone with, will all lose a degree of power along their connection. Obviously, that power loss will be worse if it's not maintained and inspected, as Mark alluded to in a previous answer. It's also the reason why we try and transmit electricity at reasonably high voltages. As the voltage goes up, the current comes down and the respective heat losses are reduced as well. So yeah, short answer is yes, it's an engineering challenge to manage, but that's what keeps me on the job.
Thank you, David. The next question says, given the scale of this development, can you give any support to limiting further applications for more solar farms inside the ring of farms you are developing? Got Mark Noon for that question.
Thanks for the question, Benjamin. And absolutely not. No, is the very short answer. And there's lots of reasons for that. But yeah, we wouldn't consider that at all. What we will be doing is having a cumulative impact assessment of how our solar farm interacts with any sites that are at a advanced stage. So if they're in the planning process or they've been considered as consented, we will then look at them in the round together. Those solar farm applications inside the ring of as you quite rightly put it, sort of ring of farms, the islands of solar, will be assessed on their own merits by those smaller applications by Newark and Sherwood District Council, and they'll live or die on their own merits.
Thank you, Mark. The next question asks, could a consortium of parish councils also get a PPA? Got John for that question.
That's a very good question. We've dealt with lots of different planning performance agreements for different types of development, but not ever directly with parish councils. So I've not actually been asked that question before, but it's certainly something we can consider and come back to you outside of the webinar. And I suppose just to try and give you a little bit of comfort, I know that the first round of documents in terms of the scoping report was very large, very heavy, quite detailed, sort of 200 pages, and you will have spent a lot of time reviewing that to provide your feedback. As part of the process moving forward, a lot of the technical documents moving forward will have what we call non-technical summaries. So it's a much shorter down version of the key bits of information in the documents that we're submitting for consultation. So that should help. But like I say, definitely something to consider in terms of having a separate planning performance agreement or something similar in terms of a legal document that we can agree with parish councils. That was a really good question. I had that before.
Thank you, John. So I know we've just hit 7 p.m, but we've got 2 questions remaining, so the team are more than happy to stay on just to answer these last 2. But like I said earlier, if you do have any further questions or feel as though your questions may not have been answered in full this evening, then please do feel free to email us. The next question asks, on Companies House government website, there is evidence that the main backers of Elements Green have strong Iranian and UAE connections. Is there a risk that these could influence the project? I've got Mark Turner for that one.
Thank you. It's a very good question. Diligent research. I think it's fair to say that people in this country who are British citizens, and everybody involved in the funding and development of the project is a British citizen. People have arrived here through various different backgrounds, and that's never more true when we have a Prime Minister whose name is Rishi Sunak. So it's true that some of the people in this project are British citizens who have been here families have been here 2 or 3 generations and have arrived here from different parts of the world. I think also any of you who are familiar with the history of Iran will know that there are a lot of people that came here perhaps in the early 70s who are not close friends of the regime currently in place in Iran. So I think you should be able to put your minds at rest that what we're dealing with here are British citizens with the same kind of names and the kaleidoscope of names that you find in the British population who have spent their lives here in Britain for many generations.
Thank you, Mark. And the last question that we have received this evening says, according to the tech register, you have a license for an 800 megawatt that runs out in 2026. You have provisions for using a 360 BESS connection you are proposing on floodland / higher grade agricultural land in Staithorpe. How are you going to use this license for an additional connection to the solar park? Got Mark for that question.
Yeah, I think the way that the tech register works and the way the grid connections work, it's slightly the other way around. There's an 800 megawatt connection, and then you can choose what you do with the 800 megawatt connection, and you apply for what you do. So it's not a case of you have a license for something and a license for something else. It's a case of having an amount of capacity, and then you create your arrangements and your connections within that capacity. Hope that answers that question. I don't know if David might want to put any colour to that.
There is a separate part to that question about the license running out in 2026, and that's not correct. I think this indicates the point by which we have to achieve a connection, but this is a continuing conversation with National Grid about how and when we will connect, and some of that's down to the timelines of our project, but it's also down to the timelines and availability that they have to be able to complete the relevant pieces of work that they have to do. So that there's no real question here of that connection expiring. What this is aimed at doing is dealing with what can happen, and you may have seen some of this in the press recently, that it is comparatively cheap to secure a National Grid connection. And so some people speculatively have done so and then have not continued with the development of their projects, and they are in essence bed blocking. So they have connections that could be being taken by developers who are prepared to invest the time and energy and money in developing a project, and they are now blocking the grid. We are quite clearly not one of those, because as you can see, we are working very hard to engage and develop this project. So we sit down with National Grid and we discuss with them where we are and what we're doing, and we manage between us the various activities that are going on to make sure that we're in line and that this capacity is secured for us and for the projects that we're working on. I hope that's a full enough answer to that question.
Thank you, Mark. We've just received one final comment from Rosemary, so thank you very much, Rosemary. We really appreciate that. If you would like to take a look at the slides again, they are available on our website, and like I mentioned earlier, our communications lines are open if you do have any further questions. So thank you everybody for taking the time to join us this evening. I will now hand over to Mark Noon for some closing remarks.
Yes, thank you very much for everyone who attended. I'd just like to say we tend to never get through every single point, and there'll be things that you're thinking of as soon as you leave the webinar. Of course, we are open for consultation for as I said at the beginning, we are open till the 27th of the month, and we will be inviting liaison on all matters regarding the solar farm, and no question is a silly question. Please ask it. We might always be able to answer, such as the PPA question. There's always a curveball here and there. Please ask them. We're all ears, and we're here to help and make the best solar farm we can make. Yeah, please come along to the events if you get the opportunity. They're really informative. You see big maps of zoomed in of your area, so you can really see where your individual property is in relation to our plans, and there's a lot more colour to the plans that we're bringing forward as well. So we've got feedback that they've been very informative. Please do attend. It's great to see you in person.
Yes, I can second that. It'd be great to see you all there. And thank you for the last comment we just received saying that this webinar has been very informative and reassuring. So it's great to hear.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you very much.